COP30. COP30 is called the COP of the truth because of the connection on the ground with the people here. We have a lot of indigenous communities, as you might have seen, and yesterday we also had a beautiful event with a wisdom keeper in the city of Pelham, actually. And we were talking about how very different forms of knowledge are actually needed for transformation. And this particular event is addressing the so-called inner-outer transformation for sustainability, for climate change. And we wanted to bring this into the COP, and especially here into the higher education pavilion, because the inner dimension in terms of research and in terms of transformation knowledge is still very underrepresented. So unfortunately, the one who actually gives the introduction to this topic is not here in person, and we were also not able to bring her in via like a live stream, because the situation of the technical situation of this pavilion is not allowing this. So Christine Wamsler has sent a video of her. And we now will have a little bit of an experiment in a few minutes if this will be audible. If it not will be audible, that's I will say a little bit about her presentation, but I hope this will work. But maybe before we start, I would like to invite you for a few moments. At the moment there is no sound. You can hear me? Can you hear me? Yeah, at the moment there is no video. Also. Yes. 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 I wanted to. That's right. I wanted to hold my microphone to the computer. Yeah. We will try that out. If it doesn't work, I will talk a little bit about this myself. Okay, so before we start, I would like to invite you for a moment. I think you need a headset. Yep. I would like to invite you to think a bit about what do you consider inner transformation to be. How does it look like in your life? You, I think, all are very familiar with climate change and all the current approaches to it, but how do you see your personal connection, your personal understanding to inner transformation? So the question that I have, I see. Anyone would like to share a few words on this?
Yes, so about 45 minutes ago, I spoke with the youth delegate, and she actually put it quite simply that you can either see the glass as half full or half empty. And when we talk about inner transformation, I think it's what kind of resources do we need, what kind of mentalities, what kind of mental images do we need in order to see the glass as half full? What kind of resources can we use to transform a situation that maybe looks half empty towards being half full. And I think in different cultures, different people develop different capacities in order to go in that proactive, creative mode. And so I think higher education, especially, is a one of the key spaces for motivating and for equipping young people with seeing the world as half full.
Thank you very much. That reminds me of meeting actually a few young people in Rio who were very, very scared and depressed and interested at the same time in this topic. So who else would like to share some thoughts? What does inner transformation mean to you?
Yeah, interestingly, my sense for inner transformation has changed a little bit recently because I got the sense that within myself there's a lot of joy and love towards the world, but often it was very challenging to maintain that inner state when exposed to a context where I perceive anxiety and stress and competition and so forth. And I felt pulled into that energy that I experienced around me. So the transformative aspect of my inner life is more about staying connected with that inner joy and source that I have while still staying empathic and connected with the world around me, but without being pulled into it. That's a very precious process happening for me at the moment.
I think what you said connects very much to the point of then also a societal and systemic transformation. One thing is to be on oneself alone and change, but then in that challenging context, it's a completely different story. We will hopefully come to this in the second part of this event, I think. So I will now try to make the video run. And Christine Wamsler is professor at the Lund University and one of the front runners, I would say, to bring this topic into sustainability science. And whilst I'm doing this, in case there is anyone else who would like to share some thoughts, most welcome.
Over the next 12 minutes, I'd like to give you a glimpse into the scientific field that examines the link between inner and outer transformation to accelerate sustainability and climate action. In particular, I focus on two questions. What role does inner development have in tackling today's poly crisis? And what evidence do we have so far? I've summarized my answers to these questions into 3 key messages. The first is that current policy approaches are simply insufficient. In fact, we are living through a global poly crisis, including climate change, a mental health crisis, polarization, inequality, and political turmoil. It's paradoxical. Many of us enjoy the utopia our grandparents dreamed of. Yet, this progress has brought serious unintended consequences. One reason for the situation is that we often see today's crisis, such as climate change, as external threats. Because the way we define problems automatically determines our responses, we currently rely mainly on external technical solutions. To make matters worse, current policy approaches are based on the so-called knowledge deficit model, the idea that simply giving everyone more information will solve our problems. But this isn't true. Finally, there is a gap between the work of professionals who focus on climate and the SDGs on the one hand, and those who focus on personal or inner development on the other. As a result, while our professional and technical skills to address today's poly crisis have grown exponentially, our capacity to use them wisely has not. The second key message is that there is a new scientific field addressing these gaps. In recent years, a field has emerged that explores the connection between inner development, behavior, culture, and systems transformation. It's called Inner Transformation for Sustainability or Existential Sustainability. Key players are increasingly recognizing its importance. For example, recent global assessment reports from both the IPCC and the Intergovernmental Science Policy Platform on Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services, IPBES, explicitly emphasize inner transformation and related contemplative, indigenous, and wisdom approaches as essential for lasting change. That's a groundbreaking development. Work in this field has shown that today's polycrisis reflects an inner human crisis rooted in a profound separation or alienation from ourselves, from each other, and from nature. This crisis stems from our modern worldview, which assumes that our thinking mind is separate from our feelings and bodies, that we are all separate from each other, that some humans are superior to others, and humanity is separate and superior to the rest of the natural world. This alienation has seeped into our individual mindsets, our behavior, our culture, and into the educational, institutional, and political structures that many of us grew up with. It affects our daily lives, where we find ourselves relentlessly exploiting and exhausting ourselves, others, and the planet. So the rules of the game mean that we all fall into the trap of optimizing for self-interest and short-term gains. It also means that individual heroes won't get us out of this. What we need is education and collective change that addresses the roots of today's polycrisis. And accordingly, research has shown that our inner dimensions, meaning our individual and collective beliefs, worldviews, and the inner capacities connected to them, are the most powerful leverage points for change. And this means that our inner lives must be part of the solution, not just our intellectual knowledge. Building on this, the third key message is that we can draw on a growing body of scientific knowledge to accelerate climate action through integrative approaches. So if we trace climate change through a culturally entrenched story of separation, as I explained earlier, we can clearly see the potential role of inner development, because it invites us to relate to ourselves, to others, and the world in more reflective, compassionate, ethical, and responsible ways. So instead of exploiting and exhausting ourselves, others, and the planet, inner development can help us reconnect and guide us toward a more caring society. Practices for inner transformation are not the panacea and should never be applied in isolation. But research shows that integrative approaches can increase resilience by helping us face challenging experiences, thoughts, and emotions more effectively, help overcome mental habits and biases that lead to short-term or polarized thinking and decisions, nurture more sustainable paradigms and cultures by addressing the root causes of climate change, and foster engagement and systemic policy integration for sustainability. So simply put, there's scientific evidence that inner development can provide an essential foundation for challenging or shifting emotions and thoughts, behaviors, paradigms and cultures, and the systems that drive or underlie unsustainable approaches, while at the same time also nurturing the inner capacities needed for transformative change. It thereby addresses the roots of today's polycrisis, the deep alienation from ourselves, each other, and nature that is woven into our mindsets, behaviors, cultures, and institutions. So in this way, inner development can act as a form of resistance to the mainstream, while also fostering the mindsets needed for sustained action towards sustainability. Education plays a very important role in this context. Over the past 10 years at Lund University, we have been co-developing and investigating courses that aim to accelerate sustainability and climate action by linking inner and outer dimensions and by weaving together diverse knowledge systems, including scientific knowledge, indigenous wisdom, contemplative practices, and lived experience. These courses are implemented by different actors. There are courses by UN agencies, including the United Nations Development Program and the United Nations Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. Other programs are offered by nonprofit organizations, faith-based organizations, as well as educational institutions. At Lund University, we provide, for instance, related programs. And we have recently also co-created a new global university coalition for student inner development for societal transformation. So, drawing on both growing scientific research and these courses, I could share many compelling numbers that highlight the importance of integrative education for supporting climate action. For example, we found significant increases in transformative capacities such as resilience, hope, connection, and agency. And these inner shifts also led to concrete outcomes, concrete outer changes, with up to 70% of participants actively increasing their environmental engagement. And at the heart of lasting change are the new stories these courses create. Stories that challenge the status quo, that create a renewed sense of hope and agency, and that foster an embodied understanding that we all matter. And with this, I hope I have offered a glimpse into the field of inner transformation for sustainability, the role of inner development in addressing climate change in today's polycrisis, the evidence we have so far, and the fact that only integrative approaches that link inner, behavioral, cultural, and systemic transformation can create lasting change. Thank you.
So funny to hear the noise around everywhere and trying to focus on this here. So Laila Martins is originally from Brazil, living in Bonn at the moment. And she's the managing director of RegenBeings. And you may want to just briefly say what this is. And then meanwhile, I put the slides on. Hi, everyone. As Karan mentioned, my name is Laila. I'm originally from Brazil. I grew up in the US and I've been in Germany for the last couple of years. I moved into the space of the inner transformation after working in the corporate sector for a long time, leading decarbonization efforts and understanding that there was something missing, and that is the inner dimension. And when I learned about the inner development goals, as I will talk about in a moment, it really allowed me to start thinking about this inner and outer components, right? I have been very lucky to be trained by Christine. So I did an entire training with her over the last year. And a couple of key things came out to me. One, we are nature. If we can all come to that conclusion that nature is not out there, that we are part of this planet, then a lot of other things become very, very simple. And what's important as well is that we bring in the scientific and the wisdom traditions. And the other thing that's come to me is I am because we are. I am only up here because that you have been doing over the last many, many years. I am only here because of the work that you have been doing. So we are all standing on the shoulders of giants. And that's a little bit of what I would like to showcase. So let me just come over here. I have just a couple of slides really quickly. This is me, so there's a Q here if you want to find me later on LinkedIn. And I created my organization called RegenBeings because it is connected to regeneration, and I believe that's the next. This is. This one in high quality. I can take. Is this one any better? Let's see if it's a little bit better. Yes, with the idea that we need to go from sustainability to regeneration. And we also need to think about not just the doing, but also the being. And I've been working in movement to move us from sustainability to regeneration. The second thing I believe is key is ecosystem building. We are all doing fantastic things in our own cities, but unless we can come together and birth things together, we are not really going to make the change that we need. So moving away from this meaning of separation, not only in our theory and in our spiritual beings ourselves, but in our way of doing the work that we're doing. The inner skills and the inner dimension is what we're here for. And of course, regenerative innovation. So we need to have new and different ways of seeing innovation. And the work I've been doing is trying to get organizations, businesses to really understand if they want innovation, that's okay. We can't stop people from wanting to do new things, but we need to think about it in a different way. And this is where regeneration really comes to play. And so a lot of the work that we're doing is around understanding that the technical solutions and public policy, which comprise most of the approaches we have today, are really not able to work towards adaptive challenges. And let me explain what I mean by that. So we believe that you have your technical challenges, right? They are easy to identify. You can find quick solutions. They are solvable by experts with a degree. They require limited changes in a specific area, and people understand, hey, there's a problem. I broke my leg. I'm going to go to the doctor. The doctor is going to fix it. That's it. That's technical challenge right there. But an adaptive challenge is what we're dealing with when it comes to climate change, because it is really hard to identify. It's really easy for people to deny it, and it is often resisted, as we've seen with so many of the news about COP30 that's happening here. It also demands a change in beliefs, in values, in our roles, in our strategies, in our way of being. And we also need solutions to have experiments. We're not going to get it right because we've been going in such a different direction as a human population that we need to find experiments, we need to trust, and we need to have stakeholders and leaders who are actually going to try new things. And last off, as Christine said, and I'm a very grateful pupil of hers, it requires collaboration. It requires cross-systems thinking as well. And so this is where the inner development goals come into place, right? So very strategic name here from the organizers that created, because you have the SDGs. You could think about it as an inspiring operational system for the planet. And then you have the inner development goals, so the IDGs, so what goes inside, so aspiring that operational system from the inside. And not only as an individual, which I think is a very common misperception that people have, but as a collective. How are we collectively making that change? And so I started working with the IDGs a couple of years already, but I'm very happy to share that in October, they have a brand new communications framework. So this has been developed over the last 2 years. They have worked with 22,000 people in over 194 countries with over 900,000 words of wisdom to help us update this. So we now have 2 new skills. We have updated skills to really help us think, how can we actually make a change? Some people look at this and say, oh, this is simple. Inner development and inner change is not that simple. You're 100% right. But we need to have a communication framework that is easy enough for us to be able to take into schools, for us to be able to start the conversation, to then going into the very deep and complex science of sustainability and regeneration, like Christine Wamsler was talking about. So some very simple way of pulling this through is we have the being, right? We have to understand and cultivate our inner life. And that can be comprised of skills such as the inner compass, self-awareness, presence. We then move into thinking. So understanding our complex world, and that is connected to critical thinking, systems thinking, long-term orientation and visioning. And this is connected to where we see indigenous people talking about 7 generations, right? So we're building all of that and trying to bring it to an audience that understands evidence-based thinking and science-based thinking. We then have relating, so caring for others in the world. appreciation, humility, and forgiveness. Forgiveness is new, and it has been very important as we've been having conversations with Australia, with South Africa when it comes to apartheid, and knowing how they were able to go from such disastrous moments and moving forward. So forgiveness is new here. Then we have collaboration, so building trust and working together, and that is co-creation skills and mobilization skills. So it's not enough for you to be very smart and be up on a stage if you can't get people to connect with you and make work happen. And then acting, so leading and enabling change. So that contains things such as courage, hope, and optimism, but also thinking about the space we're in, conscious use of resources, proactivity, and resilience. And it's very interesting to see that in these last 3 or 4 years, the IDGs have grown really into a global learning community. So we now have more than 700 hubs all over the world. I am part of a hub in my local city, and we really try to bring all of these global things into our local. So I know it's cheesy to say from acting global and local, but it's true. And now have 35,000 community members. And so, as Caroline mentioned, I'm in Bonn, and Bonn is where the headquarters of the United Nations climate change sits. So I thought, and some of my colleagues thought, why not present the IDGs to them? And so I'm really thankful to say that we've been working with the Global Innovation Hub of the UNFCCC over the last 2 years. One, in bringing the inner dimension into their systems innovation workshops, working with them directly on their projects. But then last year, we were fortunate enough to then take the UN into the Inner Development Goals Summit. So we had an entire day, day 2 of the IDGs, to talk about transformational changes and how we can bring together these two communities, the UN and the IDGs. And I'll give you a very simple example on how we can think about this change in mindset and why we found the right people to talk to at the UNFCCC. Because you can think about the problem of pollution in cars as in, I need a better car. I now need an electric car, and I need to get a car with an alternative fuel, and kind of go in that very same problem-specific direction. But actually, our colleagues at the UGIH have already been doing some inner work and already understood that actually we need some more solution-oriented approaches. So instead of thinking about the better car, maybe we can think about mobility as a service. Maybe we can think about more compacted and connected cities. Maybe we can think about telecommunication, teleeducation. All of these things are only possible because somebody stopped, they looked around, and they understood all of these perspectives. And that, to me, is a key part of the inner work that we're doing. That we're not keeping the inner work for ourselves, sitting on our cushions, feeling really good, but we are able to take that into our work and find ways to implement it. And actually, within the UN are actually moving in this direction as well. So I don't know if you've heard about the UN 2.0, but they're building kind of a quintet of cutting-edge skills. And one of their cutting-edge skills is behavioral science. So this is a place where inner work, where the work that we are currently doing can be placed in an evidence-based perspective in a way that really supports the United Nations. And so to conclude, I really do believe that here we're talking about higher education, right? I believe that for higher education, we need to go from our traditional models of passing out knowledge to really supporting our students and being the active catalyst for societal change. And within the IDGs community, Jamie Bristol is also an amazing mentor of mine. And he has built this transformative skills guide, which really helps connect the specific inner development skills to how they can learn about them and then how they can demonstrate them, and with specific examples of how that's already been putting into place. And so if I give you a very simple example here on the next slide, which I can always come back to the QR code for, we have here communication skills as a very simple example. So here it's explaining what the communication skills are. I don't know what's happening there. It's on the TV, it seems. I don't.
It's on the TV. Can you make no?
That's all right. It's gone now. So really quickly, we have the communication skill, as I told you about. we talk here how to develop. So we have specific examples of high school social studies students where climate communication was embedded, and then how to demonstrate that they actually put those skills into practice. So always how to develop, how to demonstrate, and then there are specific examples of where all of that have been put into place. So there's lots more that I'd love to share with you, but my next slide is really to kind of come back to this and my QR code if you'd like to be in contact. I really do believe we need to move from thinking only about sustainability to regeneration. And for me, regeneration is the inner and the outer. We need to be building ecosystems because we can't do this alone. We need to bring the inner skills, and we also need to think about how can we have innovation always with a regenerative mindset. So thank you so much for having me. Thank you so much, Laila. I was not expecting. You can stay seated there, please. I was not expected that you are part of the higher innovation hub with Masamba, who was actually on an event last year at the COP with Jayanti, talking about inner transformation. Very good. Let's have 2 minutes of sharing. Where do you see entry points of the inner development goals? I nearly would have said infiltrating, but transforming the climate change conference. Just get together with a partner next to you and just initial thoughts. Where do you see entry points of the inner development goals and the whole aspect of inner transformation entering the COP?
To be here. I'm coming from the University of Sydney. I had a nice little chat with, sorry, remind me your name?
Elena Vandeman from the University of Helsinki.
We were exploring this question of what could the inner work look like here at COP. And I think something we were curious about is if, because a lot of this space is quite loud, right? There's a lot of energy. We were wondering if it'd be possible to have a space that was sort of a quiet zone, maybe like a more contemplative space for those of us who like to meditate or have some kind of practice. I know I come more from the Buddhist tradition, and I'm sort of yearning for a space to meditate here. But just curious if there might be spaces like that where people can do some of that inner work or slow down a little bit. And so that was something we were talking about. So yeah, thank you for this.
Yeah, so we had a very good discussion, and we agree fully with the visualization of all the things that are required for inner transformation. And then we are like wondering what's actually blocking us from adopting them. And of course, we're looking at, on the one side, on state level, organization level, and then also on the personal level. And maybe in order for us to adopt new ways of thinking, we also need to let go of our current ways of thinking, current ways of doing. So whereas on the state level, we might need to let go of things like growth, on the individual level, on like a decision maker level, we might need to let go of things like the need to win, or or the feeling of tradition, or the feeling of status. So in order for new things to come in, we also need to help people, help organization to let go of things that are blocking it.
Thank you so much. So I'd like to invite Mark to share about how inner transformation can be entering research through transformational science, transdisciplinarity. Oh, the mic.
So thank you, Caroline. It's a nice opportunity to be here. One hears oneself through this. This is very good. So we can wait a little bit to put up the slide. So I think this has been quite an interesting session so far. It's competing, of course, with everything around here. And yes, there usually is a meditation room at the COPs, and we've actually intended to connect with those in the past. I am going to do what's unusual for a scientist and only present one slide. So usually scientists will have lots and lots of slides and lots of information. So I only have one slide. And I decided to do it that way because before I present the slide, I wanted to spend a little bit of time trying to connect to the things that you've heard before this and set it a little bit in the context. And we've heard so much about inner development and the connection between the inner development goals and the SDGs. The way that it was embedded that you showed there is of course, gives us a wonderful tool and way for looking at it. We've heard about from Christina Wamsler about the logic of paying attention to inner development, the sense of this in framing our entire problem as not a problem that comes from out there, but one that we've created that comes back to us through out there. It's like what I said in the panel discussion this morning, that climate protection is not about protecting the climate from us, from our human interactions. It's about protecting us from the impacts of climate change. But those impacts of climate change don't come about just because climate willfully decides it's going to change and start bothering us. It's rather, it's our own way of being in the world that has led to this situation that we're in. And not only climate change, but of course, biodiversity loss is a massive one, microplastics, air pollution, and many other environmental problems that we deal with. So what connects me to what I wanted to talk about for a moment, what Caroline asked if I would talk about, and what it fits well connecting us to the higher education aspect here, is the nice depiction that was shown of the inner development goals inside the Sustainable Development Goals. And we see there the analogy to what we also deal with in talking about transformations, that if we just transform the systems around us and we continue being the way that we are, we'll continue to rot the system from the core. We'll destabilize it from the core so we can set up as nice a system or structure around us as we want to. If we still have as much aggression as we experience, as much apathy as we experience, as much greed as we experience in the world, it'll just rot that from the core, destabilize those structures until they collapse. And this is one of the things I love about panel discussions and these. I've never thought of it in this way until you put that picture up there. But this is such a nice way to understand why the inner part, the component, is so important for the outer component. But if we only transition around and transform our inner components, and we don't do that systematically, we might all be much more peaceful. We might all have much more respect in our interactions with each other, but we are over 8 billion people on this planet. And if we respectfully allow those 8 billion people to remain on the planet, unless we take that step, unless we develop the more efficient vehicles that we use less because we understand our need for mobility, unless we take those systemic transformation steps, then the inside might be nice, but if the outside's constantly crumbling around the inside, then we don't have a holistic structure. And so we end up with this issue of how do we effectively connect these aspects together? And this is where we come to the point where science itself is hardly going to tell us that. Is it? I mean, science is wonderful at explaining things in the world, but it's not normative. It doesn't tell us what to do or how to go about doing things. But science can provide a platform for bringing in much more than the science itself. And this is where we come to this idea of what we call transdisciplinary research. And you can go ahead and put my slide up now. And the main transdisciplinary research, you could just, I don't want to, that's just going to leave the first one there. You can go to the one difference. So I don't want to blast you with too much at once. It's one slide, but it has a lot in it. So the name transdisciplinary research means we go beyond the traditional disciplinary research. We even go beyond the traditional interdisciplinary research to creating what many of us call a new paradigm of scientific research. And a famous book called The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, which is about how our understanding of the world shifts over time, how we go from the paradigm of the Dark Ages into the Renaissance, from the Renaissance into the Newtonian classical mechanics, from that into quantum mechanics, and so on. And I believe we're at the cusp of a paradigm shift now in our understanding of what science is about. But science has its place in the world, but there's an extension around science that it connects into that has tended to ignore. Because science is not the only form of knowledge that we have. So the only generating knowledge. We have religious knowledge, faith-based knowledge. We have indigenous knowledge. We have artistic knowledge. We've been experiencing that here with the music next to us. The artistic way and the people connect with each other. That's a form of knowledge that we have. And so what we want to do with transdisciplinary research is be able to connect together these, we'll call these knowledge systems, these various systems of knowledge in smart ways. And in addition to those systems of knowledge, we have 3 different forms of knowledge that we deal with. Those are depicted here. On the bottom, we have what we call systems knowledge. That's the knowledge that typical scientific research generates. It's showing us if you emit this much, it goes in the atmosphere, it makes this much increase in concentration, and that makes that kind of a warming. So that's our systems knowledge. Then we have what we call orientation knowledge. This is where we bring the rest of society into play along with the science, is to understand what is it that society wants to orient on. The SDGs are depicted up there because they are a wonderful component of orientation knowledge. What have we decided that we want to collectively orient on and move towards? And then we have transformation knowledge, which is how do we get from where we are towards where we want to be, knowing that wherever we're aiming for is going to be a moving target, that the planetary conditions will continue to change, our conditions will continue to change, and how do we continue to move towards this in a smart way, transforming? And I'm going to, then if you can flip the next one. I'll come back to process knowledge in a moment, exactly the question. And so, to finish this off then, what we've been working on are ways to actually go about this kind of a systematic approach to bringing in different forms of knowledge together. And there are several different models, several different idealized transdisciplinary processes. And here I just show an example of one of those, my favorite one, that looks at a transdisciplinary process as being 3 phases. You have an initial phase where you're trying to frame the problem. And on the left and on the right, you have the societal component and the scientific component. And normally, you would have just the right side going down. The scientists would figure out what the problem is. They would do research on the problem. They would finish that research, would convert it into an understandable paper, and they would hand it off to policy. But our idea is from the very beginning, when we're forming the problem, to work together with societal stakeholders that are relevant, not only policymakers, but people from activist communities, from youth, from religions, from indigenous communities, and so on. And then we work on this problem together to finally come to solutions that we think are likely, not yet proven, to be able to have a better chance of being accepted and workable in society. The way we go about all of those individual steps is the middle of this diagram, what we call process knowledge. And we're at the very beginning of really understanding the processes of how do you effectively not just bring people together and not just have them listen to each other a little bit or say their own thing and hardly listen to each other. How do you have them really listen, really get it, really embed it, and really carry it on? And so even though transdisciplinary research is a bit over 50 years old, it's still at its very beginnings. So stay tuned. I think we have a lot to do in the future and a lot that we can do in the future, and a great opportunity to offer a new paradigm of research and a new paradigm of ways of being inner and outer and connecting these together in also our higher education systems. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's always, I think, very, in a way, impressive or inspiring if something which is actually very complex can become so simple. It's illogical. Thank you. And I would like to invite Sister Jayanti now on stage. Sister Jayanti is from the Brahma Kumaris, and I think, Mark, I didn't mention but we are, from the Brahma Kumaris World Spiritual University, actually, how we say in India. We don't use the spiritual university so much outside of India, because universities are very much more the academia way of knowledge production. But in India, I'll call it like this. Sister Jayanti, now I've invited you particularly to become, to let us allow to become very practical. Mark was saying we can be sitting here, we can listen to information, but how can we listen here sit here and listen or interact in a way that maybe consciousness can transform? Thank you.
I enjoyed both of them greatly. I want to share a story, and it's a story of when I was 19 years old, and the founder of the organization Brahma Kumaris was 92 years old. And it had just been a few weeks that I'd been studying properly. I'd been in contact with the Brahma Kumaris since I was a child, but the proper study of that happened much later. And after a few weeks, I decided that this is to be my life. And I had told the founder this. I'd met him several times before that, but now it was a very different meeting in which I was understanding his role and who he really is. And he asked me 3 questions. He said, "Is it possible for everyone in the world to be happy?" I didn't have an answer. And he said, "Yes, it is." Then he said, "Is it possible for everyone to be healthy?" Again, he said, "Yes, it's possible." And the third thing he said was, "Is it possible for every person to have all that they really need?" And again said, "Yes, it's possible." So in a very simple way, he was talking about a society in which you're happy and healthy and you have all that you need. And not about one individual, but a whole society, a whole culture that was defined in this way. And as I say, the language was very simplistic, but it describes what we would like to see, leaving no one behind, but being able to have everything available for all. And he then went on to say, it's possible, but it's only possible when we've let go of anger, greed, ego, attachment, and lust. And those words sound out of place in a scientific context, but if you think about it, what happened to the environment? We lost respect for the environment. They became very greedy. They became very angry about the things we would like to have and we don't have. We became very discontent. Think about all the negative energies. And on the other side, think about all the positive states of being in the world, not just in one individual, but within the world. And again, I share a little story that really highlighted this for me. He also said at that time, it's not something you can tell people to do. You can't tell people give up this, and this. What you have to do is do it yourself. And if you do it yourself, then others are going to listen. And they'll see and observe and follow. Many years later, the year 2000 to be precise, at the Millennium Peace Summit in New York, it was the first time that religious and spiritual leaders had been called together in that assembly hall. Side events have happened, but never together in the General Assembly. And I was fortunate to be there with the head of our organization as part of her delegation. And the first evening was colorful, in purple robes, orange robes, green robes, black robes, white robes, all chanting and saying prayers in a variety of languages. So it was quite amazing. The next day, it was the working session. And they had all the individuals who headed up the different units of the UN. For example, International Labour, WHO, UNICEF, Environment, Population, Children, they were all there. Assistant Secretary Generals, all Under Secretary Generals. And each one had a story to relate. They were talking about how since the founding of the UN, where the aim had been peace and all the other ideas that relate to peace. If you have people that are not healthy, they're not going to be peaceful. If you have people who are greedy, it's not going to be peace for all. So they had all these other related associations, units come up accordingly. So every one of them spoke about how things were worse than when the UN had started. They had more money, they had more resources, they had more people, they had more technical information, they had more everything. But somehow the goal just wasn't being reached. Environment, we see what's happened since 2000. WHO at that moment said, we thought we'd overcome TB, but it's come back with a vengeance. But yes, what we have done is eradicate smallpox and polio, but there's a new thing on the horizon, and that is a pandemic of mental ill health, which we see today. And everybody else just had a sad story of going down, down, down. And they said, this is why we've called the religious and spiritual people together, because you have contact with the grassroots as well as the leaders. But when you connect with the grassroots, what you're helping them to do is experiencing transformation. And it's through that transformation that then there can be a better world, a just world for all. Different language, but you see how it relates to the things that you both were talking about. And so our work has very much been focused on that. A change of heart, a change of consciousness, so that there can then be a better world for all. How does it happen? Changing consciousness happens through spiritual wisdom. It doesn't happen through science, because science is only now beginning to explore what consciousness is. In fact, it's only been the last 40 years that even positive psychology has come on the scene, and they've been able to explore positive feelings and emotions. Prior to that, we didn't. Why? I asked somebody who'd won a Nobel Prize, Templeton Prize in positive psychology. And she told me that at the end of the 19th century, what we had was the study of negative emotions, because negative emotions come like a sledgehammer. And when they come, they have an impact that's heavy, that also has an impact that's lasting. And it was easy for us to study these things and then quantify them and so on and so on. But when you think about the positive feelings and emotions, they're fleeting. They come and they go very quickly. And they're so subtle that you can't weigh them, you can't measure them. They've only had the equipment in recent times to be able to quantify to some extent some of these positive feelings and emotions. So consciousness is something far more subtle and way, way beyond the scope. To the extent that when we think about where is consciousness, spirituality tells us, well, this is what we know, experiment with it, and discover it for yourself. Science tells us, well, we are not quite sure exactly where it is. And so we haven't been able to study it in the same way. They try, but really it's research, which means experiment, experiment, experiment. And so when I understand what spirituality is saying, and I experiment with those ideas, then I can actually feel that I am consciousness. Not that I have consciousness. Very different. I am a conscious being, and I am conscious. I have consciousness, not that I'm the body, and then I say I have consciousness. And so it's a different standpoint. And in that experience of who I am as consciousness, something very powerful happens. And yes, you need to want to do this for yourself, just as with any other research. You need the passion to be able to pursue it, because there'll be many blocks that will come in the way, and many people who will tell you otherwise and try and shake you away from your goal. But if you're really passionate, you're going to keep going and overcome those hurdles. And through that, give it your time, your attention, and come to some conclusions. Consciousness study and research is absolutely the same. Together with Brahma Baba, the founding members of our organization, a group of about 350, majority were women, very few men. But the founder was a man, so the men had a good example in front of them. They spent 14 years studying the laboratory of the mind and understanding and experiencing both consciousnesses and the different layers of consciousness, thoughts and feelings, beliefs, intuition, conscience, and even deeper, the patterns of behavior that are embedded within us that we carry. Now, this has nothing to do with the brain. Brain is, again, just one aspect of our physiology. And what has been a misleading red herring in science has been to think that it's the brain that is consciousness or has consciousness. So we're starting off on the wrong track. When we start experiencing through silence, you won't take 14 years, it doesn't take that long, that the principles of that knowledge system, the base, was established through that period. Through the wisdom coming through the founder, but also connecting with the wisdom of each one of those individuals and resonating with that. And so they came out of that laboratory of silence and went off into the cities of India and shared these ideas, and people were being transformed. The ideas reached the world outside India in 1971, and I had the good fortune of meeting the person who actually became the instrument to share these teachings across all 5 continents. I spent 40 years with her. Mark, did you meet her, Daddy Jayanti? No? Okay. Next time round. So it was an amazing experience. But out of all of that, what I come to understand is that when consciousness changes from the material to the spiritual, all the needs of the inner being are fulfilled. And once I experience that inner fulfillment, I'm able to develop all my inner abilities to the highest level. But there's a little trick that's important to understand, and that is that the inner being actually has been at that point where it had that highest level of potential. But we've lost it through the ages and come to the point today where we are totally trapped by noise and pollution, and we add to the noise and the pollution, and you see the state of the world and the breakdown and chaos. And so this concept of coming back to what is originally our own treasure is a very different thing to saying, I'm here and I want to go up there. No, I was there, it's there within me, and yes, I've come sliding down And it took a long time to come sliding down, many, many generations. But now at this point, I can actually ascend. And this is the time that it's possible. This is that transition period in which we see what science can offer, we see what politics can offer, we see what the economy can offer, but the result is a lot of chaos. And so it's a turning point for humanity. When I was seeing the signs saying that is Bellum going to be the turning point, I feel it can be. Why? Because so many people are recognizing that transition to another level of awareness is vital. Without that change, we can't move. I want to quote somebody you may have heard of or even come across. I think Tom knows the person. This is a woman who is now the president in Iceland, Halla Thomasdottir. And she was at our conference in which Brahma Kumaris are one of the founding partners, Spirit of Humanity. And this was a program that was held in conjunction with the Well-Being Economic Forum. Now, it's a strange combination, well-being and economy and the Brahma Kumaris, but it's okay. Strange times need strange partnerships. And so this was a program of about 300 people together. And she said in one statement what you were sharing, Mark, and that is that all the problems we see outside have been created by human beings. And we've been looking at solutions from the outside. The problems are outside, but we're looking for solutions outside, and we haven't been able to find any. Maybe it's time to go on the inner journey. And once we go on the inner journey, we're going to be able to find solutions for sure. And then a little bit later, we had a meditation together in public. And it was clear that she was deeply practiced in meditation. It wasn't a new thing for her. She really got deep into it. I came out of the meditation and I was waiting for her to come out. But so she was talking from practical experience, and most of her working life has been in corporate USA. But then she came back to Iceland and took on this role, elected to this role. So yes, I believe that the answers are within. I believe that we have to go on that inner journey. And it doesn't take years. It can take just a little while to understand and then to practice those ideals. But they're not just a practice of meditation. In silence, you're connecting with your own inner core values. And once you do that, your behavior changes, whether you're an individual or whether you're a leader, doesn't matter. Your behavior changes and you're able to impact a circle around you. And I won't go into the detail, but Howard had researched that a kind act by one individual inspires 125 others to do the same. And a leader, somebody at university, they are able to inspire not just 125, but it's hundreds and thousands. And today we are serving several universities in India where we run a program called Values Education. And that's happening, firstly, it was happening on a BA level, and today it's happening for an MA also. So things are moving. That's the good news. Thank you.
So, Jayanti, thank you very much. Thank you very much for all your inputs and sharings. I would like to come back to those in this circle for the last couple of minutes and hear from you if you have any reflections on our conversation on stage. I think Benjamin,
like this. I teach in a university program designed at radicalization, extremism, and violence. And I experienced quite a high degree of aggression in myself and also collectively within the group. And of course, the topic itself also is very loaded with aggression. So if you could maybe share your views on how do you get that inner transformation to young people within higher educations, especially in a society that is operating at very high velocities, very high degrees of uncertainty, and aggression. Also, when you look at certain debates that people are dealing with. So you mentioned that we need to let go of certain emotions and certain attachments. So yeah, maybe if you could share a bit on that specific topic of aggression within collective spaces of higher education.
You direct that to someone.
I know anyone.
Siwa Jurek, you respond to that?
We're all not being very aggressive here and grabbing for the microphone. But that's a part of it. And I think that maybe we can give 3 quick responses from 3 different perspectives, because we bring very different perspectives in that. For us, certainly the setting is very important, as you very well know. And so I'm not teaching you much here, but the difference in the type of setting, in terms of creating a safe space where people can express themselves, but in a form that helps to allow the source of aggressions to be expressed, but without activating the aggression in itself overly strongly, is important. And so an example of a setting for that is that one thing we have found for some of the topics that we deal with that are very, very conflicted, very contested topics, is first allowing people to individually express their viewpoints in a circle or in any formation, but just the expression, not feedback, not comments, and not trying for a solution, but rather just simply gathering the viewpoints that are in the room as a first step. And that helps by not shortcutting to the second step of directly driving for solutions. People become aggressive because they see, oh, mine's going to lose. If everybody sees their point is on paper, then that helps to still the aggressions. That's one example of many that we have through facilitation process knowledge. So, and like I said, you know that fairly well, but I think it's important to establish that as a fundament of what we can do with it practically. What we do with it from the inner side, I will hand to my wonderful compatriots to the left.
Or maybe a quick from my side. I spent all of 2024 working in the inner dimension, and now I spent all of 2025 working in the cultural arts, cultural heritage sector. And what I noticed is that there's no sector that's able to deal with difficult feelings better than the cultural arts sector. So I'm sorry about the noise that you might have been experiencing, but if you go there in the pink pavilion, we've had people that are living in favelas, people that are living in peripheries, people that are living in different ways, and they're going to rap and they're going to create music about their lived experience because that's what they're living through. And those are the most chill, calm people because they found an outlet for their expression. So if one thing that I would like all of you to take from Brazil is understanding how you can directly connect the inner with cultural and artistic expression, and how that fear and that hurt and that pain. On Saturday night, we had an entire night talking about Afro-Brazilians and how they have lived through the atrocities that have helped them, and how arts and music and connection have supported them as a community. So I really do recommend all of you that are in this inner space, spiritual space, to see how you can learn from the indigenous, from the Black Amazon, and many others in the peripheries of connecting culture and inner development.
Agree with all the techniques that are being shared, but the one that we ourselves use is to recognize that my original state of being is peace. And when I come back to that and I keep reminding myself and coming back to it again and again, it resonates with the soul, and you actually begin to talk peacefully, communicate peacefully, behave peacefully. It's a journey. It doesn't happen overnight, but it happens.
Thank you all very, very much. And I personally am just very happy that we could bring these thoughts into the COP, even though I have to say this noise was a bit challenging. Would you be open for a short silent moment together with us? Okay. And once again, thank you for your presentation.